John, welcome to the show.
A pleasure to be here, Ben. Thank you.
I have a feeling you're about to blow my mind in the next hour or so. So yeah, really, really great to have you on the show. I'm so excited to get inside your brain and understand a bit more about this world that we're moving into.
You will regret saying that. I've been told my brain is a scary place. But hopefully brains will be neither blown nor entered into. But yeah, very excited to be here and welcome the chance always to talk about all things agentics and AI.
Well, I think people will know you in Australia, especially as being a specialist in that field, and also obviously more broadly in the Salesforce ecosystem that you've been working in for some time now. But just for the benefit of any listeners that maybe haven't seen your videos, haven't sat in front of one of your presentations, can you tell me a little bit about your background, your career story, and really how your journey has led to being an agentic AI expert?
Yeah, sure. It's a weird one. Like I point out on the LinkedIn profile, in the context of Gen AI and agentics, like I really do feel like it kind of came to me. That's why it's weird. You know, people talk about how can you possibly say you've got a career in agentic AI that goes for decades when this stuff has only recently appeared. And like even I'm like, it wasn't kind of by design. It's kind of accidental, but it's because the idea of agent-based AI and agent-based simulations and automata is actually very old, like predates me. It's all the way back to like the early 70s. And in fields that I talk about increasingly now, you know, in a lot of the videos I do around what was called cellular automata, which is really the study of artificial life, the study of using silicon to simulate complex behaviors. This is the world of chaos theory and Jurassic Park and all that fun stuff. And my very, very early career was actually all about genetics, right? So that's the intersect. The intersect point is I started in genetics, and in particular, I was very interested in computing as applied to genetics. You got it. But that's where we were playing with supercomputers and the type of maths we were running to do really, you know, early, medium tier genetic analysis are the same mathematics that then become absolutely pivotal in modern machine learning and increasingly in neural nets and things of that nature. And so from there, I actually wound up in more economics. And again, people go, how'd you go from genetics to economics? But it's the same thing. The common thread is that simulation is very important to econometricians and building economic models, which we did for, you know, state and federal governments, for some pretty significant stuff. Again, the common thread was understanding how you can use this idea of agents, which I'm sure we'll come to model complex behaviors. And from there, in doing that, spent a lot of time building bigger and bigger and bigger data and AI systems and made the jump. We could see as well, there was a big gap between what you could do with the tech and what businesses were kind of equipped and ready to do. So made the jump into full-scale tech consulting with a little place called Cloudwerx back in the day, which I'm sure many people in the ecosystem still know and love and remember. I'm very proud of the time there. But in particular, was very focused, even in joining Sherpas, around I want to do whatever's going to happen with data visualization and big data visualization in the cloud. Right at the right time when Uncle Benioff started our big, what was then called Wave Analytics, and has since been named many things. CRMA, I think it's just come to basically end of sale now as it rolls through into Tableau. So big, long story, but wound up in a place where was one of the very first people getting really serious about embedded intelligence and doing that in the cloud. And then wound up in a situation where, you know, Sherpas was acquired by Accenture. I wound up doing a lot of work with Accenture actually worldwide around this very, very specific thing, right? About how to do embedded intelligence, which increasingly then was machine learning inside the place of work. So we're really passionate about this idea of like, I would rather build one graph perfectly built for a salesperson to tell them exactly what they need and have 2,000 salespeople use that graph every day. I would rather do that than keep building these big, beautiful machines that get seen by like 3 people and kind of half ignored. And that's a really important principle for us that I think is still critical to understanding LLMs and agentics, is that we talk about being data driven. This is a bit contentious, but oh well, that's, you know, welcome to JC. The truth is that you actually don't want most top leadership of a business to be truly data driven. I will say that again. You actually don't want the top leadership to be entirely data driven, because part of the reason you have that job, part of the reason why it is risky, is that they are doing things that have not been done. The reason that you have a board is they have to make decisions for which there is no certainty, right? And so, yes, you want them to be informed, of course, but many decisions have to be made entirely on the basis of a strategic balancing with imperfect information. But when you go even 3 levels down in the business and you talk about managing a customer relationship, there's basically no downside to giving that person more and more accurate information about the nature of the relationship in play. So when you talk about being data-driven and the payoff for it, it's actually about grassroots. It's about enabling visibility to data, not all the way up here with management reports or with big fancy models, but the middle and at the front line. And that's kind of been proven out. That idea of embedded intelligence was kind of a new thing. 10 years ago, it was architecturally challenging. Now I think it's become absolutely essential. And really the final triumph of that brings us into, what we're talking about today, is that the arrival of large scale general models, particularly in the form of large language models, scalable to the level they now are via an API, now kind of means like the only sensible way to talk about these things are about mass scale population productive enablement, right? You're talking about the fastest adopted application in human history. That hasn't happened because it was only being used by leadership, right? That's happening because it's being used by everybody. And really the final barrier to adoption has fallen by saying it talks your language, so you don't need to learn any intermediate piece, and it's highly adaptive, right? So we're starting to see now the emergence of interfaces. Salesforce, we know, has been posting about the one they've kind of got in beta, entirely generative interfaces, right? Where the whole idea of UI is spontaneously generated at runtime, because why not? Because we totally can, right? So you kind of wound up at the point I've been arcing to and been very interested in, which is how do we enmesh decisioning systems and modeling systems and information systems into how we do, right? Not just how we plan or how we inform, but actually how we do. And now, like the final is to go fully agentic. We now have systems that do by themselves.
Yeah.
So the real mind game at the moment is the realization that agents are users. That's the big shift, is that we are increasingly now building data pipelines that we've been building for years where the consumer is not a human. The consumer is an infinitely instantiatable, very intelligent, autonomous entity. We still have to do the same stuff. We still have to build the right stuff, getting to the right place. But it's kind of gone full circle where we're like, the machine is actually the client and then acting as the final interface back to the human. So weird and wonderful, but when you lay it all out, it does make sense. And it's also why, again, I'm a bit of a old man shouts at cloud, because it's cloud technology and it's a Simpsons quote, right? Old man shouts at cloud, because I get fed up with us coming up with new definitions. Everyone's had this whole definitional argument about what an agent is. I'm like, Google it. And if it doesn't say something from about 1970 through to 1989, Google it again, right? Because we've had this debate, we've had this argument, and it's kind of disrespectful to like 50 years of amazing mathematical research. That's part of the reason we're here. So like get up to speed with what it is and then get over that, because what nobody has a roadmap for, what nobody's done before is like, what does this look like? What does this do when you do start to fully embed it, like we are now starting to do in production with major enterprises? Like that's the problem. And hence why I've been focusing more and more now on education. I think that the jump you've got to take right now to understand some of what I just kind of mapped through. I mean, that's 30 years of my life, and it's weird and wonderful stuff that I liked as a hobby. And it feels like the entire tech world has kind of had to get up to speed with that in, about 18 months. So it's understandable that we're all in very different places with it at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I think like for everyone else, this has been like a rapid change in the market, but for you, it's been something you've seen gradual, right, over that period of time.
But it still shocked me. Like I was in San Francisco in 2018 talking about, the rise of the next wave of do-it-yourself machine learning, and the paper "Attention is all you need" basically is dropping in that same year. And those of us who were in the space, we could see what was emerging from things like Instruct GPT and what it meant. We started talking really breathlessly about wow, ontologies, John's big favorite word, these are finally going to be really obviously valuable. They've always been valuable, but like you may need to like sell them and index them. They're that valuable. But even knowing all of that, the sequence of events, the speed, even for me, focused very closely on this. We went from to GPT-3, then 3.5, then 4, then 4.0. That sequence, that's not a line. Like it is huge jumps. As somebody who has also, because data geek and started in science, right? I run a lot of sims, a lot of experiments running hard data and evaluations. So like I see the numbers and I also try to keep across the white papers that it's not just hype. In fact, I joke that I feel like I've spent the first 10 years of the tech career trying to de-hype machine learning. I would typically come in and go, curb your enthusiasm, right? And yet now with this thing, we're kind of in this state of like, I understandably don't want it to be as big a deal because I can't quite process that, right? And so there's the anti-hypers, they get a lot of goodwill right now. And I've actually kind of been walking around more and more going, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I totally get that. But no, now would be the time to panic. Now is definitely the time to wake up and grapple with this. Because even if it stopped today, even if tomorrow we passed some type of law that banned all further development of AI, just what we've currently got, it's going to take us 10 years. I mean it, as a science community, to really unpack everything that's been discovered. And people, you don't take my word for that. You can see like people running labs like, DeepMind have a similar view, is that we're compressing an enormous amount of new discovery right now into products. And of course, we're not stopping. Quite the opposite. I expect we'll see GPT-5 announcements literally in the next week, 2 weeks tops. We've just had Grok 4, we've just had the latest stuff with Claude. It's just going to keep battering us until, the big changes really start to kick in.
So even you're scared, does this just get out of control at some point?
No. So my concerns are not so much about the control, although like whenever I get up and do the speeches, I always talk about Geoffrey Hinton, who he's correctly called, one of the godfathers of machine learning. And of course, amazingly has the Nobel Prize along with his colleagues. He's very vocal about existential threat. If we continue on that curve, I agree. Once you get to very, very high levels of intelligence, which will happen sooner than we realize, we need to regulate that. I don't think there's actually any credible disagreement with that. Like you can hear people like Eric Schmidt is really trying to get everyone to realize, like we've got some like next generation nuclear level conversations we've got to have. But I think that is distracting for most of us. It's important, and if we're asked to vote on it, we need to take it seriously. But the tension that I think a lot of people are reporting, I don't want to misquote here, but I think I saw a Forbes article only recently, where they're talking about how fears about AI and confusion about AI is already coming up repeatedly, in day-to-day, employee surveys across the board. I don't think that's addressed by talking about, Skynet. I think it's addressed by the very real reality of like, we can see disruption already happening. We've all grown up with the stories of industrial revolutions. Everyone quite rightly is sitting here going, is the shoe about to drop and I'm the schmuck and I don't have a job? And that's why, I'm talking today as JC, but obviously, as you know, I'm a partner and proud member at Cloudwerx with a lot of, again, some of my old friends from the Sherpa days and some of the best in the business and the ecosystem. And very deliberately, our considered position is that we're trying to do human-centric AI and human-centric machine learning for kind of exactly this reason, is that there's lots we can do with this technology right now. What's not the right answer is to just go, how do we fire as many people as possible? That's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea for your customers. It's a terrible idea for your business. It's not the right approach. It's a terrible idea for the technology. And that conversation is the thing that I'm trying to do to help, with the fear. Is what I'm afraid of is that things are moving so quickly in a very tactical way that the changes to business are not understood quick enough, that the changes to way of working is not understood quick enough, and people are inherently feeling less safe and less empowered. I look at that and go, that's inherently not a great place to be. That's an unstable place, for businesses to be, because we're not taking the people with us. I have some other midterm concerns about, I'm really worried about generative media. That's part of why I'm doing some of the stuff I'm doing with the videos. Is we can't stop it. It's going to happen. But I think we are very close, as in like by the end of the year, we're going to start to see things like real-time generative media. So being able to make a video live and effectively uncensored potentially, I see huge risks given that we're still grappling with kind of the dopamine addiction impacts of things like doom scrolling, right? I go, well, if doom scrolling hacked the lizard brain, what is on-demand auto-generative immersive content going to do? Like, it's going to be on a different level. So, but that again, that's not Skynet. I'm sitting here going, I'll let the people much, much cleverer than me deal with this exogenous threat. I'm just worried about what the current tech means to this and our day to day. And how do we navigate the change in the business with a very real factor, which is human fear? It's something that we've already started to talk about with clients and customers when they're on the adoption journey, is to go like, we need to listen to that. When our employees, when users express the early signals of that, part of what we need to do in carrying this technology to market is we need to stop and create a space where that fear is heard. And so we can engage with it, because it doesn't have to be the terrible outcome people are understandably concerned about. And if you are afraid of a technology, it's very unlikely you will properly fully engage with it. What I am worried about is if we do not engage with this technology as a population, other people will control it. Other people will ultimately be able to steer it. And it's too powerful for that. It's really, really powerful. I need you, even if you are not terribly happy with the technology, and there's lots of good reasons not to, you should be engaged. What I think we've learned politically, really hard lessons of the last 20 years, is that increasingly the default position is to disengage because we feel we can't change anything. And I'm like, well, hang on, this isn't your local government. This isn't even your federal government. This isn't even a nation. This is a moment for you as consumers, us as consumers, and the technology. I mean, I don't think disengagement is actually the correct response. I think we need to have a stake. And we genuinely do have a stake because it was trained on us. Like, we are in there, right? So it's kind of silly to not feel like you don't have some type of stake.
For sure. So on your point, I saw a Forrester's report that stated, I think, non-technical headwinds will slow AI agent implementation and adoption.
Yeah.
Are they basically saying the technology's there, but we're not? Like, that's the...
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and that's been my position, by the way, pretty much the whole way through, is that I really enjoy, God help me, I still really enjoy consulting. I keep waiting for that to stop. But part of why I enjoy it is that it's a privilege to get to go just from corporate environment to corporate environment to corporate environment. Again, as a biologist, I really enjoy the new setting and seeing how different org psychology applies in those different environments, particularly as you have this socio-technical interaction. And as a result, adoption management, right, is always something we've been very focused on. That's a big part of, if you're going to spend on things like embedded intelligence, you have to measure and track the adoption. And so I know that what it takes to get a large group of humans in a business to effectively use something that is really just a extremely low energy, passive presentation of current information, something which should be really quite easy, it's still a huge journey of change. Because I'll give you an example, real example from the last like 8 years of rolling out some of the biggest CRMA implementations in the world. It instantly blows up stories. Many businesses have sacred stories where people will pick their favorite data set, they'll pick their favorite spreadsheet, and it perpetuates a narrative that helps them, steer the politics of these big, complicated things we call organizations. And the moment you go, yeah, but the number's 7, and it's in that box every morning on everyone's desktop, those stories die, right? Because I'm sorry, the number's 7, it's not 48. So your story's wrong. And just that alone can understandably trigger pretty massive cultural rejection by large parts of the system. And it doesn't matter that that is illogical or, even irrational. Yeah, welcome. We're humans. I'm not a perfectly logical or rational entity, right? And so your job is to deal with that, to have a psychological understanding, again, that socio-technical interaction, right? Now you have a thing that can sing, it can write poetry, it can draw pictures, like it can sit there and argue with you about why you're wrong. Even worse, if you don't calibrate it correctly, when you say, oh, I think number's 48, it can sit there and go, oh, I'm terribly sorry. You are, of course, right. It's 48, right? Like it can just flip flop and agree with you. So just saying that, I'm going, if it takes this much effort to ensure organizational adoption of a billboard that just says the sky is blue, right? The idea that we were ever just going to have this horizontal rollout of the most powerful technology humanity's ever seen, it's just naive. The change management implications are enormous, but it isn't the tech. And I also, at the same time, I will balance and go, I also don't believe that you can't do any of it without sorting out your data, without sorting out your processes. That's crap as well. And that's always been crap.
Yeah, that's what we hear all the time, right?
No. And that it is important. Both those things become really important disciplines. But the reason why I go, hang on, modify that language for a second, is because it's deliberately worded to be a blocker, right? And I'm like, that's just not how business works. Business is aggressive, very high levels of cycle and change. Nobody's doing it right. Everybody has stuff they're not doing quite right. Now, what is true, though, is that you need to be now taking those disciplines really seriously for reasons we can unpack, right? It is vitally important. Generative AI in the business, and agentic AI then with bells on, is a flawless intersection of your data estate and your process estate in the context of your human user base. But like, it's both of those things all the time, 24/7, round the clock. So if you know you're really sucky at one or both of these things, then this journey is going to demand that you level up. But to say that, oh, don't touch that thing until these things are perfect, one of the fastest ways we're using the tech is to accelerate how quickly we can develop better data systems and better process systems. So that's why I go, just curb that a little and instead say, to be successful, to unlock the full potential of generative AI, you must now take data, you must now take knowledge, you must now take process excellence seriously. That's true. That's 100% true. But when people are trying to find a place to get started, they hear this cross-cutting noise. Well, don't start there. Go over here and learn SQL, or go over there and do BPMN. And I'm like, start wherever you are, use whatever you have, do what you can, right? It's too big. The thing is so big to believe I'm going to go over there and that's going to be the place where I learn how to do generative AI and agentics. No, it's not. It just isn't. And if I can't point to one place and say, that's the place you go and do Ted's Agentic Course 101, get your certificate, right? It's not the right way to think about it. This is this big horizontal moment. It's more like talking about digital, right? And that's also why I think you see things like the Forrester result, is that means this tech is kind of by default, it's a form of transformation. Even if you're trying to POC it, it's kind of transformative. And that's code for takes a long time and gets complicated quickly. I think I know, I've seen it. I know that a lot of the POC stuff where people are saying there's this wall between POC and production, it is because for whatever reason, usually a political cycle or a sales cycle or both, we focused on, this is how we sell tech. Back to my, iPhoneification of tech. We sell tech by doing a POC. POC does whiz-bang funny stuff. We now sign off and we do the next bit that makes it real. And it's like, yeah, except what we're selling is electricity to people who have never had it, right? Or it's an aqueduct when you've never had a supply of fresh water, right? The POC is actually probably, that's more comfort seeking than actually a necessary evaluative step. That whole world of POCs, that comes from procuring tech systems over the last 20 years, where procurement would say, here is the specification. We'd like you to prove your capability to meet that specification. That still works fine for an awful lot of stuff in cloud and software. That doesn't work and now it talks to you and sings songs and writes haiku, right? You can make it do that and you can do the little demo and then you're like, no, release it into the wild. And you have, to go back to my Jurassic Park analogies, that's how you get raptors in the kitchen, right? It then proceeds to go everywhere.
So yeah, that's a good, because I mean, what we've seen, and we'll talk more on what you're seeing later, but in terms of like, we've seen a lot of publicity around certain products that have been stood up that do seem to be proof of concepts, but like a standalone, it's the ability for an agent to engage with a customer on a service request, like one use case, rather than it being viewed as like a digital transformation or an AI transformation of business.
Yep. And again, part of that is, again, everyone's been trying to figure this out, right? If I talk about like, and I know we will talk about it, I'm hugely bullish on Agentforce. It still annoys me that large amounts of the broader IT industry are just sleeping on it. I think that's about to change for reasons we'll go into, because Agentforce for me, even before it was Agentforce, we were actually implementing it in some of literally the world pilots before it even had that name. And the moment I saw it, I was like, you've built a declarative interface for building a React agent, and it's live inside Salesforce. This is huge. This is a really big deal. This is a bigger deal than if you just told me, here's LangChain, another AI word, right? Here's LangChain in Salesforce. I would have been like, that's pretty amazing. But showing me what I saw, I was like, this is like 2 jumps ahead. This product is going to be valuable basically for like a multi-year roadmap, if I'm any judge, of where this tech is going. And part of the reason for that was because Andrew Ning, another one of the godfathers, he'd only given what I think is kind of the definitive guide, his whiteboard walkthrough of this is what it looks like, agentic behavior. We get that phrase from him. He said, agent has a definition in the literature. Some of what we're doing is sort of an agent. Rather than fight about that, let's call it agentic, agent-like, and move on, right? So that had happened in April. There's this pre-Agentforce announcement pilot going on, I'm going to say around June. And I'm sitting there going, how did we go from like the guy has talked about these ideas here, and we've got this thing standing up and growing inside the world's #1 CRM in such a short space of time? And then it was launched, and now we've had like 3 iterations. And I think part of the problem, going back to your point around the POC, how do you still have to try and sell that, right? Everybody's still trying to engage in an engine that consumes technology, right? If you tried to sell any piece of software the literal way I'm having this conversation with you now, some, cool cats might dig that and buy it, but that's just not how the mass distribution system we're currently all living in is set up, right? It needs a level of prepackaged value proposition. It needs demonstrations that say, hey, the finished product is, I can talk to a customer, right? When we were doing the same thing with Einstein, right? Hey, I can score churn, right? You kind of have to do it, but let's be clear. It's not the product team that knows that they need to do that, or that they're building to that. It's a function of carrying that idea to market. Yet you have to package it in order for all the people making the decision to go, okay, now I get it, right? But the underlying capabilities for some of these platforms, most of the ones I'm interested in, are so much more than that. Like they're all there. And it's part of as well why I think where you get POCs trapped and not going to production can sometimes be because the tooling was really over optimized for getting you to that cool bit where it talks to you, which is super cool. But then you try to scale and you go, whoa, hang on, this, and I won't name names, there are some things out there where this is being talked about a lot, where it's like, it was really cool for POC, it's struggling now to scale, right? I don't put any of the Agentforce or prompt builder tech in that bucket at all. Quite the opposite. I'm like, man, like this thing is going from strength to strength in terms of its scalability. But part of the reason for that too is that, again, they approached it as a platform play, and you have to approach it as a platform play. We're seeing the emergence of these big LLM providers precisely because it needs to be platform. So Salesforce made 2 really important decisions that I think were brilliant. The first one was, we're not going to build our own large language model, right? We're going to let you bring your own, because people are spending trillions on that. We don't really need to be another one of those. A much better idea is using things like Amazon Bedrock to bring your own. So now you can pick whatever foundation model floats your boat. And importantly, you're less likely to be afraid of your investment. You're not going to have a regrettable investment in the Salesforce framework, because if tomorrow it turns out that LLM's twice as good, you can just switch it. You can literally switch it in from underneath. So that decision was a critical decision that I think we will look back on and go, that allowed the Salesforce strategy to ride waves of frontier model innovation without getting wiped out. Like I know other people will be. And the second thing they did was they moved incredibly quickly to get a vector database native and running inside Data Cloud. That was the other critical piece that I've talked about a lot. And people kind of go like, why are you so focused on this one thing? They're not saying that as much anymore, right? Now people have had to get up to speed with. So vector means unstructured, and so that means documents. Oh, okay, I get it now. When you feed LLMs documents at runtime, what we call RAG, retrieval augmented generation, they get a lot better, not just a little bit better. They get a lot better, particularly in all the applications in the front office, right? Now, if Salesforce hadn't gone hard on that, and I know some of the product teams that did that and were building that and been shipping that, that's a hard thing. That's a really hard thing to have decided we're not just going to ship it, we're going to scale it. If they hadn't done that, we would have got to this bit where we're like, it's bring your own model, and it's also bring your own basically everything else. And you wouldn't have been able to have that moment where Benioff stands in front of everybody at Dreamforce and says, don't DIY your AI, right? Because the big secret ingredient they had, to your point again about POCs being trapped, right? And why I don't feel that happens a lot in this ecosystem with this tooling, flow. The real big win built in to Salesforce is the flow orchestrator. I made a joke video at Dreamforce where I went, I think Mark said the word flow 16 times in about 2 minutes, right? Because he gets it. He completely gets it. The orchestration of both process and data is, remember what I said, those two things, data and process, they basically mesh together to make these systems work. That's flow. Like this massive system that runs the front end of like the majority of the planet also runs this standard low code interface for orchestration. That now works seamlessly with secure LLMs. That's actually amazing. That it meant that we don't have this thing called a vector database, so we'll add that. We're not going to build an LLM, but we'll let you bring any of those that you want. We've got the orchestration. We've got the existing environment. We've got the security and the trust. I reckon this is basically an enterprise-grade platform for agentics. They had that, and nobody really knew yet what that was going to be. And now that it's really starting to unpack, I think people are beginning to understand that I need those things to go from a POC toy to this is now scalable. And Salesforce, as always, is saying, we'll give you a way to do that isn't DIY, right? And that is as clicks, not code as possible.
But do you think, like, I know you said the messaging from salespeople is a product, Agentforce, and I think like that, I'm learning from you today that it's broader than it's a platform, not a product.
Yeah, it is.
But all of the talk I get, and I hear from candidates, I want to do an Agentforce project, I want to implement Agentforce. It's like it's seen as a sales cloud or a service cloud, like it's just another Salesforce product rather than it being a platform. Does that messaging have to change? Or
yes, it does.
Can it change?
I think it is changing. I mean, we've seen some senior people at Salesforce, writing books to try and start this process of change. But again, like I said, if you were really sitting here, if you're trusted by Salesforce.com to figure out how am I going to carry this idea to market, you can't go straight to market and say, behold, everyone, there's a new thing called a cognitive intelligence layer, and all of us need to learn a brand new set of principles. Like it just won't work. Right. And so I think there has been actually a deliberate strategy, and it's the right one, around trying to productize as it goes to market. But now that it's here, and particularly as we talk about like the trailblazer culture, the people who want to participate in the platform, we do have to now kind of push ourselves to gear out. The thing is, this company invented the best example of this in Force.com, right? The first big uptick in the TAM graph from Salesforce was whatever it is, 8 years ago now, maybe it's 10, showing my age, right? When you first had the arrival of platform as a service, right? So that's usually all I have to do when I'm talking to people who are in the community and they're saying, like you just said, how do I do the Agentforce thing? I'm like, well, you start by not telling yourself that it's like getting another cloud, because it isn't. It isn't like that at all. You start by going, this is more like learning Force.com. You need to add the essentials to your toolkit. And then you need to ask yourself, wherever you are right now, how could you start to layer generative AI into that? Because I guarantee you've come up with 100 ways in like 20 minutes, no matter what you're doing. It starts by also saying, and one thing I'm trying to communicate more is that the prompt builder, we barely knew thee. I was walking around telling people, this is my favorite prompt builder. And like, I use a lot of different builders, but the prompt builder was amazing. It still is amazing, being able to just drag and drop merge fields in. I'm now seeing all the sexy new Y Combinator startups, with the GUI. Guess what? It looks like prompt builder. We've had prompt builder for like 18 months. We didn't know how good we had it. But prompt builder is essential to every production Agentforce deployment we're doing. Because of course it is. What you typically do with the agent, we're getting into the details of the difference now between the agent loop and the rest of the LLM behavior. What the agent loop typically does is it calls workflows that are themselves now generative workflows. And generative workflows are managed in the platform inside the prompt builder layer, right? So if you want to go from where you are to Agentforce, the first stepping stone really is figure out how to get a prompt builder component into a flow. I guarantee you there's a way to do it because there's so many amazing ways to use it, whether it's autocomplete or quality, data quality management. There's so many ways to do it. And it's so cost effective, like crazy cost effective. But what you're learning when you do that is actually like the secret to any type of scalable production success with Agentforce, because you will want to be able to say, now that you've selected the particular topic that you're going to execute right now in the context management engine, which is how I think about Agentforce, right? Now I want you to go do something. You don't always want that to be programmatic. You want it to still be a little bit clever in how it's talking or writing or merging data. And that's prompt builder. That's also why we've seen the change now, that's still unpacking around flex credits. Again, exactly the right thinking where they're saying, I actually want to make sure that the credit you consume when the agent does stuff also helps cover when it's doing things in the prompt builder, right? Because it's kind of like the octopus arms. They've got their own intelligence as well as the whole organism, and we need to hook that together. If you get good at that, you are practicing the skill, that now has the new cool hashtag, context engineering. And that's actually what it's all about. And context engineering, if it's going to be a discipline, which I fervently hope it is, that's by its very nature, that's platform level, right? You have to think like you're building on force.com.
You mentioned cost effectiveness of prompt builder. One of the things I wanted to understand, broadly speaking, for AI transformation is how are you helping companies with things like business case and measuring ROI? Because you mentioned before, just sacking all of your people isn't the right way of going about it. But I guess that would be a way, if that is, not that I'm suggesting people do that either, but if that was a way of looking at ROI, you'd be like, well, what were our salaries and now what is our cost on technology? Well, that's the difference in. But if that isn't the way to do things, how do you actually look at ROI when you're doing a broad AI transformation?
First of all, there are two camps, right? Just straight up. There's leadership who gets it, and you can't stop them. But this has always been the case, by the way. Business cases are, again, from a period of procurement that isn't fully in effect anymore. And so you still need them, particularly if you're in a regulated company or a publicly listed company. There needs to be a trail. But there's two very different flavors of business case. There's the business case when leadership knows they want to go over there. And the case is then some of what you're talking about, those levers, they're already defined for us because they fall out of the business strategy. Then you get this other one, which is a bit more amorphous, where, we've been told we need to do an AI thing, and now we need to justify it. And that's usually where, again, we're like, hey, I'm going to stop you because I promise you this will not end well. This is not something we need to do organically. If you don't have strategic leadership saying this is clearly now a strategic matter, why not? Right? We need to go back to that. And the reason I'm saying this is, to quote, Gary Vaynerchuk, when people had been saying things like, what's the ROI of marketing? He famously said, what's the ROI of your mother? Right? That this technology is at a point where I'm like, if you don't presuppose that you've got to do something with this tech just to learn, I kind of don't know how to help you. We shouldn't be at business case. We should be at education, which again is why I'm focusing a lot more on education. The data tells us, and certainly my experience is telling us, that I think the majority of businesses aren't in that bucket anymore. I think the hesitancy, which is completely understandable, people have a high level of jadedness and doubt about new tech, right? Understandably, I think that's starting to fade. And more people are in the bucket, which is, okay, we need to do this. Now, once that happens, What we then need to understand is, where are you strategically as a business? Because most of them are going to say, I'm really into this productivity thing. An element of productivity will be cost, right? But again, in this country, we don't have a situation where we have like crazy amounts of people that we want to get rid of. We have the opposite. We typically have people going, I can't find enough of the right people and the skilled people and the good people. Hence why we have these questions about, productivity and how to deal with it. So yeah, when you're talking about these things that fall out strategically, particularly in the ANZ landscape, again, firing a bunch of people isn't really at the top of the list. What is, I think, going to happen, just to touch on that fear, and everyone's talking about this, what I am worried about, what everyone should be worried about, what does this do for entry-level jobs? Again, I think it will be less of a problem in Australia because we have such a need for skilled labor, but I think that's also a matter of time. I think we are going to have a situation where our current pathways for young Australians and for young workers are going to be challenged. But also, as someone who's worked extensively in the skills system in Australia, can I also say, I think we've done a pretty poor job of taking them very, very seriously as a community as well, right? I don't think government's done a poor job and educators have done a poor job. I think there's some deeper questions we need to ask about, like, it's 2025. Are we sure the best pathway is to have somebody just rock up and be confused as hell in a job for 5 years so that they can tick a box that says I've had 5 years experience? Like, is that the best use of a human brain in a world where we're now obsessed with monetizing intelligence, right? We can probably push ourselves to reimagine entry-level vectors for humans if those humans now get to also use ChatGPT or Agentforce or Claude or Gemini, whatever you want. I think that's that's a broader societal question that is, I think, already here and is just going to grow and deepen. I think in terms of productivity cost out, that's more where you're going to see that. It's not a come in and fire people, but what you might see is that the cycle of rehiring changes. If you can do more with the same group of people, and if there are people who would leave your business anyway because they either weren't the right fit or they want to move on, what's going to happen is you're probably going to think twice about whether you rehire to exactly the same role, right? And that's industrial revolution stuff right there. That is exactly what is going to play out, is not necessarily mass layoffs, but you are going to have this subtle but very real shift, kind of a morph into how many roles need to be in certain places and in what things. Coming back to the business case, though, there's that element, but the bigger element we're seeing is the question about both, well, customer experience, but actually the really big one is employee experience. There's just this recognition that we increasingly have to compete on effectiveness and excellence inside a business system where we've competed away a lot of the early wins, right? One of the reasons why I was very focused on call centers with early agentic and LLM rollout was not for the reason, to our previous conversation, not for the reason most people thought, which is, oh yeah, we're going to fire a bunch of people. No, because I've worked with service centers my whole life. I've written some articles about why I'm passionate about the service industry, because the service industry is an interesting one that spans all parts, all sectors, both public, private, not-for-profit, right? You have that role of service everywhere. One of the things that service centers have realized in excellence in service over really 20 years, 30 years, is knowledge management. Once you, again, compete away all the early wins of make sure you pick up the phone when it rings and measure how long it takes to answer stuff, what usually starts to come out as a really key competitive advantage is the caliber of your ongoing knowledge management, right? And so the reason I was very focused on service environments for early experimentation is because, back to that point, data and process, a pretty good working definition of what happens around data you have to actively use in a process would be something like knowledge, right? Something very similar. The process of morphing data into these higher level, again, what we call ontological constructs, concepts, if you like, business ideas, so that they can be used by the process. That's basically what a knowledge base does. It turns out that is the true oil that fuels the LLM engine. It's not data, it's knowledge, which is the most refined, the most, difficult thing really to distill from all that information. And so a business case that talks about harnessing internal productivity through better knowledge is usually very achievable, but it takes the conversation in directions that, again, are not always what people were expecting. They were expecting us to be talking about it's going to sit up and talk to your customer, when really it becomes, what if Slack just answered questions for every employee brilliantly with a slash command? You're like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, in that magical universe, we would all be really happy. It's like, you can do it right now. They've worked really hard to make that a product. That's a different type of solution and a much broader user base. But the ROI of that is undeniable. It's usually very, very easy to demonstrate.